The first time her Tesla went dead at exactly 3:17 a.m., she thought it was a glitch. I knew it was a confession. The sharp pop of overloaded current cracked through the quiet like a snapped branch, followed by a soft electronic whine dying into silence. And then her voice, tight, confused, cutting through the still air outside my window, while the faint smell of heated wiring drifted through the screen like a warning I'd been waiting weeks to hear. I didn't move, didn't even blink, just stood there in the dark of my living room with my phone steady in my hand, camera rolling, watching the glow from her driveway flicker out as her $80,000 Tesla sat lifeless at the end of a cable that was never supposed to be there. And that's when I knew every single detail I'd been tracking. The numbers, the logs, the quiet dips in power had finally lined up into something undeniable. My name is Ethan Cole, and 6 months ago, after a divorce that took more than half of what I'd built, I installed that solar system myself. Every panel bolted down under the Texas sun, every wire run clean and tight like my old man taught me, because when you've spent 20 years working as an electrician, you learn real quick that energy isn't just power. It's money, it's survival, it's the difference between staying afloat and sinking quietly while nobody notices. That system wasn't some eco-friendly hobby, it was my lifeline, feeding a modest 1,600 square foot house, a small battery backup, and just enough excess to keep the bills low and my head above water. And for the first 3 months, it ran perfect, smooth, as a well-balanced load, until the nights started getting strange. At first it was small, barely noticeable dips in output right around midnight, then 1 a.m., then closer to 3 a.m., always the same pattern, like someone flipping on a heavy appliance that didn't belong to me. And I remember standing barefoot on the cool tile one night, staring at my inverter screen glowing blue in the dark, watching the numbers drop harder than they should have, feeling that slow, crawling suspicion settle in my chest. That's about the same time Brenda Whitmore decided my solar panels were a problem. HOA president, real estate agent, the kind of woman who drove a pearl white Tesla Model S and wore authority like it was tailored just for her. Always smiling like she was doing you a favor while tightening the screws. Always talking about community standards, like she owned the air we breathed. She sent me my first violation notice 2 weeks after I moved in, called my panels visually disruptive, said they brought down property values, even though they were fully permitted, inspected, and cleaner than half the roofs in the neighborhood. But that didn't matter to Brenda, because Brenda didn't deal in facts. She dealt in control, and from the moment she realized I wasn't going to roll over, something shifted in the way she looked at me, like I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was a problem she needed to solve. Then the power drops got worse, sharper, more consistent, always late at night, always pulling just enough to make my system strain. And that's when I stopped guessing and started measuring. Because one thing about electricity, it never lies. And if someone's stealing from you, the numbers will tell the truth long before they do. I started treating my house like a job site after that, not a home. Because when something does not add up in a system you built with your own hands, you do not ignore it. You trace it, step by step, circuit by circuit, until the truth shows itself. The next morning, I pulled up the inverter logs with a cup of black coffee gone cold in my hand, scrolling through timestamps while the early sun bounced off the panels outside. And there it was again, the same pattern repeating like clockwork. A steady draw between 2:50 a.m. and 3:20 a.m., pulling nearly 40 amps at peak. Way more than anything inside my house should have been using at that hour. Not my fridge, not my air conditioning, not even the backup battery cycling, and definitely not me, because I was usually dead asleep by then. I remember tapping the screen with my finger, feeling that familiar itch in the back of my mind. The one that tells you something is off, but you just have not proven it yet. And I said it out loud too. An empty kitchen, somebody is taking power that does not belong to them. That was the moment this stopped being an inconvenience and started becoming a problem I needed to solve. Over the next few days, I installed a secondary clamp meter on the main output line, ran a separate data logger, and cross-checked everything against the inverter's internal records, because numbers do not lie but bad readings can, and I wanted this airtight. And what I found tightened the knot in my chest even more. The draw was not random, it ramped up, gradually, peaked, then tapered off like a controlled load, like something charging, something big. That is when my eyes drifted across the street to Brenda's driveway. To that pristine Tesla that she polished like it was part of her identity, always parked nose out, always plugged in during the day, but never at night, at least not where anyone could see. The thought hit me slow but heavy, like a breaker flipping into place, and I did not like it. Not because it was complicated, but because it was simple. I stepped outside that evening just before sunset, the air still warm, the smell of cut grass lingering, and walked the edge of my property line like I was inspecting a fault line, eyes scanning the ground, the fence, the shadows between houses. And that is when I noticed something that had not been there before, a thin black cable tucked low along the side fence, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, running from the direction of my utility box toward hers, disappearing beneath a cluster of decorative shrubs that had suddenly been planted a week ago. I crouched down, brushed the leaves aside, and felt the insulation between my fingers, still warm from current, and for a second everything went quiet, like the world had stepped back to let the realization land clean. She had not just been complaining about my system, she had been using it, quietly, methodically, like it was hers to take. I leaned back on my heels, staring at that cable, and instead of anger, I felt something colder, something more focused, because this was not a mistake, this was a pattern, and patterns can be predicted, measured, and most importantly, used. I did not pull the cable, I did not confront her, I did not even cut the line, because people like Brenda do not stop when you catch them. They just get smarter, and I needed her to believe she was still in control. That night, I went back inside, opened up my system settings, and started mapping out every possible way she could be drawing from me, every safeguard, every threshold, every limit that kept my system stable. And I began to understand exactly how far I could push it without breaking anything on my side, and that is when the idea started forming, slow and precise, like a blueprint unfolding, because if she wanted to pull power from my system, then I was going to let her. I was just going to decide exactly how that story ended. I did not sleep much that night, because once you see a system being exploited, your brain does not shut off. It starts building solutions whether you want it to or not. And by sunrise, I was already back in the garage with my tools laid out across the workbench, the faint smell of dust and warm metal hanging in the air, while the inverter hummed quietly in the background like it knew something was about to change. I pulled up the system interface on my tablet and began digging into the advanced settings most homeowners never touch: load thresholds, voltage ceilings, safety cutoffs, all the guardrails designed to keep everything running smooth and predictable. And I studied them the way I used to study blueprints on job sites, looking for where control could be shifted without breaking code or risking damage to my own equipment. Because here is the thing about electricity, it is not about force, it is about balance. And if someone leans too hard on a system that is not designed for them, the system does not fight back, it simply stops cooperating. I spent the next 2 days upgrading my setup piece by piece, installing a secondary monitoring relay, calibrating my smart inverter to log more granular data, and most importantly, setting a dynamic load response that would allow the system to supply power normally up to a certain threshold. Then tighten the output curve just enough that any excessive draw would trigger a controlled shutdown sequence, not a surge, not anything dangerous, just a clean, precise refusal to keep feeding something that did not belong. I also mounted 2 additional cameras, one facing the side fence where I had found the cable, another angled toward Brenda's driveway, both hidden in plain sight, both feeding directly into my phone with timestamp overlays that could not be argued with. Every step I took was deliberate, quiet, and legal, because I was not interested in confrontation, I was interested in proof, and proof requires patience. Over the next week, I let everything run as usual. I did not touch the cable, I did not change my routine. I even waved to Brenda when I saw her checking her mail, her smile tight and practiced like always, as if nothing was happening, as if she had not been pulling energy from my system night after night without a second thought. And every night right on schedule, the logs lit up again, the draw creeping in just before 3 in the morning, climbing steadily as her Tesla drank from a source she assumed was invisible. And I watched it all from my phone, sitting in the dark with the screen casting a pale blue glow across my hands, recording everything, every watt, every second, every pattern locking into place. By the end of that week, I knew exactly how much power she was taking, exactly how long she needed to charge, and exactly when she would plug in. Because people who think they are getting away with something tend to get comfortable, and comfort makes them predictable. I stood in my kitchen one night, staring at the live feed, listening to the soft hum of the system adjusting itself, feeling that steady calm settle in. Because the plan was no longer an idea, it was ready. All I had to do was wait for her to do what she always did, and let the system respond exactly the way I designed it to. By the second week, it stopped feeling like I was reacting to a problem and started feeling like I was running an experiment, because every night followed the same script, and every variable was exactly where I needed it to be. The air outside had that dry, late summer stillness to it, the kind where even the smallest sound carries, and I would sit at my kitchen counter with the lights off, watching the live feed from my cameras while the system dashboard glowed steady in the corner of my tablet, numbers flat and quiet until right on cue. 2:53 a.m., the first flicker, a slight dip in output, then a gradual climb in load like someone easing their foot onto the gas pedal. I could almost picture it without even looking, Brenda stepping out in her robe, glancing around the cul-de-sac like she owned the silence, then reaching down to connect that hidden line she thought nobody knew about, confident, consistent, and completely unaware that every second was being recorded. The system responded exactly the way I designed it to, smooth delivery at first, no resistance, no warning, just enough power flowing to keep her comfortable, to keep her routine intact, because the key to a clean trap is letting the other person believe nothing has changed. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint hum of current moving through the walls, feeling the rhythm of it like a pulse, steady, controlled, building toward a limit only I could see. The numbers climbed higher than they ever had before, pushing closer to the threshold I had set, and I remember glancing at the clock, watching those minutes stretch out, knowing this was the night she would go just a little too far, because her pattern had been shifting, longer sessions, heavier draw, like she was trying to squeeze more out of something she never paid for. My phone buzzed softly as the system flagged the approaching limit, a quiet notification that felt louder than any alarm, and I tapped the screen, bringing up the live data, watching amperage and voltage dance right along the edge of what the system would tolerate. Outside, the camera feed showed her driveway lit faintly by the charging indicator on her car, that soft pulsing glow reflecting off the polished surface like a heartbeat she thought she controlled. I did not touch a thing, not a switch, not a setting, because everything was already in motion, every parameter locked in, every safeguard aligned to do exactly what it was supposed to do. Then it happened, not all at once, but in a clean, precise sequence. The load crossed the line. The system tightened, output restricted, and within a second that steady hum shifted into a sharp, controlled cutoff, a quick electrical pop followed by silence, so complete it felt like the whole neighborhood held its breath. The charging light on her car blinked out, the faint glow disappearing like someone flipped a switch on reality itself, and a second later her porch light snapped on, flooding the driveway in yellow as she stepped out, confusion written all over her posture, looking down at the cable, then at her car, then around the street like the answer might be hiding in the dark. I stood there watching through the screen, the cool glass of the phone against my palm, feeling that calm settle deeper, because nothing had failed, nothing had broken. The system had simply done what it was designed to do, and for the first time since this started, she was the one left without control, standing in the quiet with a dead connection and no idea that every move she made from that moment on was being captured in perfect, undeniable detail. She froze there for a second, just staring at the dead cable in her hand like it had betrayed her, and even through the grainy night vision on my screen, I could see the shift in her posture. That tight confidence she always carried suddenly slipping into something sharper, something uncertain. She stepped closer to the car, tapped the charging port, unplugged, and plugged it back in like that would somehow reset reality. But nothing happened. No light, no hum, just silence pressing in around her, like a wall she could not push through. I watched her glance up and down the street again, slower this time, more deliberate, like she was trying to make sure nobody had seen what just happened. And that was when she crouched down near the shrubs, reaching for the cable she had hidden so carefully, pulling it free inch by inch until the full length of it was exposed, black against the pale gravel, undeniable. My cameras caught every angle. The way her hands moved quick and practiced, the way she checked the connection point along my fence line. And for the first time since this started, She looked nervous, not angry, not entitled, just uncertain in a way that did not fit the version of herself she showed during the day. I stayed completely still inside, barely breathing, the quiet hum of my system now replaced by the faint buzz of standby mode. Everything stable, everything recorded, because this part mattered more than anything else, not the cutoff, not the inconvenience, but the reaction, the moment where intent becomes visible. She stood up slowly, holding the cable like she was deciding what to do with it, and then she did something that told me everything I needed to know. She did not leave it where it was. She did not pretend it had always been there. She gathered it quickly, coiling it tight, and dragged it back toward her side of the fence, disappearing behind the shrubs with that same urgency people use when they realize they have been caught, even if they do not know how. A minute later, her porch light clicked off, her driveway went dark again, and the street returned to that same still silence like nothing had happened. But my phone screen told a different story, timestamps stacked in the corner, data logs still updating, video files saving one after another, clean, precise, impossible to argue with. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally loosen, not because I was relieved, but because the waiting part was over, the unknowns were gone, and everything I needed was sitting right there in front of me, recorded in high definition and backed by hard data that did not care about opinions or excuses. I set the phone down on the counter and looked at the system dashboard one more time. Every number back within normal range, every safeguard intact, nothing damaged, nothing out of place, exactly the way I planned it. And I remember thinking how quiet it all was, how something that had been building for weeks ended not with chaos, but with a simple, controlled stop that left her standing in the dark holding the evidence herself. The next morning, the sun came up, like it always did, casting clean light across the panels on my roof. And for the first time since I noticed those power drops, the overnight logs were flat, no dips, no spikes, no hidden draw creeping through my system, just steady production and steady balance, like the house had taken a full breath after holding it too long. I poured my coffee, stepped outside, and looked across the street at Brenda's driveway, her Tesla sitting there clean and silent, and she was nowhere to be seen. But I knew she was inside, probably staring at that same car, trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to rebuild the story in her head in a way that made her the victim again, and that was the part she had not realized yet. The system did not just cut her off, it exposed her, and now all I had to do was decide exactly when and how to let the rest of the world see it too. The hardest part was not catching her, it was deciding what to do next, because once you have proof, real proof, the kind that lines up second by second with clean data and clear footage, you cannot just ignore it and go back to normal like nothing happened. I spent that morning at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrubbing through the video frame by frame, watching her movements again under daylight conditions, seeing every detail sharper now, the way she handled the cable, the way she checked over her shoulder, the exact moment she realized something was off, and I paired that with the system logs on the other screen. Timestamps matching perfectly, voltage curves dropping right when she connected, load spikes climbing exactly when her car started drawing power. Everything syncing together like a report you could hand to anyone, and they would understand what they were looking at without needing an explanation. I exported copies, backed them up, labeled everything carefully. Because documentation is not about emotion, it is about clarity, and I wanted this as clean as possible. By noon, I had a folder sitting on my desktop that told the entire story without a single word, just data and evidence speaking for themselves. I leaned back in my chair, the soft hum of the air conditioning filling the room, and thought about how this would play out. Because confronting someone like Brenda directly would only give her room to twist things, to deny, to deflect, and I had seen that playbook before, so instead I did what I knew would matter more. I called the utility company. The representative on the line had that calm, professional tone of someone who had heard every kind of complaint, but when I explained that I had recorded evidence of unauthorized power draw tied to a residential solar system, her voice shifted slightly, more attentive, more precise, and she walked me through the process of submitting a formal report, asking for load data, timestamps, any physical evidence of tampering, and I told her I had all of it, organized and ready. She gave me an email address and a case number, and within 15 minutes everything was sent, files attached, logs included, Video clips trimmed to the exact moments that mattered. After that call, the house felt different, quieter in a way that was not just physical but final, like a line had been crossed that could not be undone. The rest of the day passed slow, steady, normal on the surface. But underneath it there was that constant awareness that something was already in motion, something outside of my control now, but built entirely on what I had set up. Late in the afternoon, I stepped outside to check the panels, more out of habit than necessity, and the sunlight hit the glass just right, reflecting clean and bright, nothing out of place, everything working exactly as it should. Across the street, Brenda's house looked the same as always, perfectly maintained. Nothing to suggest what had been happening just a few feet away from her front door. But I knew better now, and more importantly, so would someone else soon. I went back inside, set my phone on the counter, and let the system run, steady and balanced, because there was nothing left for me to adjust, nothing left to prove. The rest of this was just waiting for the moment when the truth would no longer be contained on my screen, but would step out into the open where it could not be ignored or rewritten. The call came 2 days later, just after 9 o'clock in the morning. While I was tightening a junction box out in the garage, the metallic click of the screwdriver echoing softly as my phone buzzed against the workbench. I wiped my hands on a rag, picked it up, and saw the utility company number on the screen, and for a second everything slowed down, not because I was nervous, but because I knew this was the moment where everything I had documented was about to leave my control and become something official. The voice on the other end was calm, precise, the same representative I had spoken to before, and she did not waste time. She confirmed my case number, referenced the files I had submitted, and then said something that settled everything into place. They had verified irregular load activity consistent with unauthorized external draw, and they were dispatching a field technician to inspect the connection point. I leaned against the bench, listening to her outline the process, the inspection, the documentation, the potential consequences, all laid out in clear, measured terms that did not leave room for interpretation. By the time the call ended, I had a scheduled window for that afternoon, and a quiet certainty that this was no longer just my problem to prove. The hours leading up to it felt stretched, every sound sharper, every minute slower, and I found myself glancing out the front window more than usual, watching the street carry on like any other day, cars passing, neighbors walking dogs, nothing on the surface hinting at what was about to unfold. Around 2:30 p.m., a white utility truck rolled into the cul-de-sac, clean, official, the logo on the door catching the sunlight as it came to a stop right in front of my house, and I stepped outside to meet the technician, a man in his late 40s with a clipboard and a steady, practiced demeanor, the kind of guy who had seen every version of this situation before. I explained everything again, not because I had to, but because clarity matters in moments like this, and he listened without interruption, nodding slightly as I showed him the logs on my tablet, the timestamps, the matching footage, the cable path I had traced along the fence line. He crouched down near the shrubs, where I first found it, brushing aside the leaves with careful movements. And when he uncovered the cable, he did not react with surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement, like a missing piece clicking into place. He followed the line with his eyes, tracing it toward Brenda's side of the property, then stood up and made a note on his clipboard, the scratch of his pen sounding louder than it should have in the still afternoon air. A few minutes later, another vehicle pulled up, this one smaller, marked with the HOA logo, and my gaze shifted across the street as Brenda stepped out of her front door, her posture already tense, her expression tight as she spotted the utility truck and then me standing beside it. She walked over with that same controlled stride she always used, but there was something different in the way her eyes moved, faster, sharper, like she was trying to read the situation before it fully revealed itself. The technician turned slightly, acknowledging her presence, and began explaining the inspection in the same calm, professional tone, while I stood there just off to the side, silent, watching everything unfold exactly the way it was supposed to, because this was no longer about suspicion or theory. This was the moment where what had been hidden in the dark was now standing in broad daylight, documented, measured, and impossible to ignore. Brenda's smile came out first, that same polished, practiced expression she used at HOA meetings, but it did not reach her eyes this time, not with the technician standing between us and a clipboard already filling with notes. She crossed her arms lightly, posture controlled, voice smooth as she asked what exactly was going on, and the technician answered in that calm, measured tone, explaining that there had been a report of irregular energy draw and they were verifying a potential unauthorized connection. No accusations, no raised voices, just facts laid out one piece at a time like a blueprint she could not interrupt. I watched her glance down toward the shrubs for half a second, just long enough to confirm what she already knew was there, then back up again, her expression tightening just slightly before settling back into that composed mask. The technician knelt again and carefully pulled more of the cable into view, not yanking it, not making a show of it, just exposing it inch by inch until the full path was visible, running clean from my side of the fence straight toward her property. And when he stood up, he did not look at me. He looked at her, holding the line in his hand like a question that did not need to be asked out loud. She tried to respond, something about shared infrastructure, something about misunderstanding, but the words did not land the way she wanted them to, not with the cable right there, not with the timestamps and logs already submitted, not with the technician calmly noting everything down without reacting to her tone. I stayed quiet, hands at my sides, feeling the weight of the moment settle in, not dramatic, not explosive, just steady and final, like a switch that had already been flipped. The technician asked a few direct questions. When the line had been installed, who authorized it, whether she had documentation, and each answer came out a little less certain than the last, her voice losing that edge of control she usually carried like armor. Then he explained the next step, that the connection would need to be disconnected immediately, that a formal report would be filed, and that any unauthorized draw from a residential solar system could result in penalties, not as a threat, just as a process, the same way he would explain a faulty meter or a damaged line. I watched her face in that moment, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes flicked briefly toward me before snapping back to the technician. And there it was, that realization, settling in, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and heavy. The understanding that this was no longer something she could control or talk her way around. He disconnected the cable with a simple, practiced motion, coiling it neatly and placing it aside, removing it from the system like it had never belonged there in the first place. And just like that, the line that had been draining power night after night was gone. The connection severed clean and final. The afternoon air felt different after that, lighter somehow. The faint hum of my system returning to its normal steady rhythm without that hidden pull beneath it. And as the technician wrapped up his notes and prepared to leave, Brenda stood there in the quiet, no longer speaking, no longer directing anything, just watching the last piece of her control being taken away in broad daylight. I did not say a word. I did not need to, because everything that mattered had already been said through data, through footage, through the simple, undeniable presence of that cable now sitting disconnected on the ground. And as the utility truck pulled away and the street settled back into its usual rhythm, one thing was clear: she had not just lost access to my power. She had lost the one thing she relied on more than anything else, the ability to act like no one was watching. The neighborhood went quiet after that, not the normal kind of quiet where people go back inside and forget what they saw, but the kind where something lingers just beneath the surface, something everyone felt but nobody said out loud. And I could see it in the way the next few days unfolded, small changes, subtle shifts, like the street itself was recalibrating. Brenda stayed inside more. Her Tesla parked in the same spot, but no longer connected to anything. No soft glow at night, no quiet hum of borrowed power, just a still, silent machine that now depended on exactly what it was supposed to depend on. Nothing more, nothing hidden. I went back to my routine, early mornings, checking the system, watching clean, steady output graphs that did not dip or spike unexpectedly. Every line smooth and predictable again. And there was something satisfying about that simplicity, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. A week later, a formal letter arrived from the utility company, printed on thick paper, the kind that carries weight before you even read it, outlining their findings, confirming the unauthorized connection, detailing the violation in clear, precise language that left no room for interpretation. And while it was addressed to me as the reporting party, a separate notice had been issued to her, one that came with fines and a requirement to correct any unauthorized modifications to her electrical setup. I did not need to see her copy to know what it said. Because systems like that do not leave loose ends, they close them cleanly. The HOA board held a meeting that Friday evening, and for the first time since I moved in, Brenda was not the one controlling the room, her voice lower, her tone measured, while others asked questions she could not easily redirect, and I sat in the back, not speaking, just listening as the same structure she had used to control everyone else turned into something that now held her accountable. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made a scene. It was not that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, more precise, like watching a balance shift in real time. After the meeting, people started looking at me differently, not with sympathy, not with curiosity, but with a kind of recognition, like they understood something had happened that mattered beyond just one cable and one car. And the truth was, it had never really been about the electricity, not entirely. It was about the assumption that nobody would notice, that systems could be bent quietly without consequence, that control meant you could take what you wanted as long as you did it out of sight. I stood outside later that night, the air cool, the panels above me reflecting faint moonlight, and listened to the steady, even hum of my system running exactly the way it was designed to. No hidden drains, no silent theft, just clean energy moving where it was supposed to go. Across the street, her house was dark, no movement, no noise, just stillness. And I realized something then, something simple but solid, the kind of thing you only really understand after you have seen it play out. Justice does not have to be loud to be final. It does not need confrontation or spectacle. Sometimes it is just a system doing exactly what it was built to do, recording, measuring, and eventually shutting down anything that does not belong. And when it happens, it leaves everything exactly where it should have been all along.